So we've talked about management, accountability and legitimacy challenges, and we also talked about how the modern tools of the government operate. Essentially, we can summarize by looking at these tools. We can say that they either are the direct tools of government or they belong to the indirect category. The direct tools would be a provision of the food grains as part of the public delivery system, or they could be direct transfer of cash. So these would be direct. These are instances where the government is directly involved in the governance process. And the indirect forms or the indirect tools of government which we observed are on the increase, are being more favored by governments in general. These take a different form: grants, loans, subsidies. These would be indirect forms of government. Take for instance grant. It's perhaps one of the earliest tools of indirect government action. What are the characteristics in general of grants? From the point of view of the grantor government, grants rank high on atomicity, in the sense the use of the grantee's existing administrative structure. When the government gives a grant to an institution, let's say an education institution, in general no new administrative structures are required to be created. The existing structure of the government, the existing structure of the education institution, these are sufficient to ensure that the grants are utilized properly. And in relative terms, grants are not very coercive in nature. There are not too many restrictions in comparative terms attached to grants, because there's a considerable amount of discretion for the recipient on how the program should operate. In general, the grants are meant to stimulate or support some initiative, and they are also generally temporary in nature. So the recipient is expected to continue with the funding on its own when the grant expires. In general, this is how it works. That means the government participates in the provision of the service in the form of a grant, but the grantee does the actual performance. Loans are another example. They are another indirect tool of government, where the government can help meet some of its goals. I can give you an example from the e-governance space. This is an example perhaps from 2 years ago, where the AP tourism, the undivided AP tourism, it gave a loan to a young entrepreneur who came out with a wonderful e-governance idea to provide an Android-based solution which could be used by tourists visiting the city so that they can be guided in a professional manner. So this was a young entrepreneur who had a good idea. There was this state of Andhra Pradesh which wanted to promote tourism and which wanted to promote a very professional conduct of its guided tours. So how did these two come to meet? Through a loan, a small loan given by the AP Tourism to this young entrepreneur. The loan was to be repaid in several installments over several years and so on, but this was one way the government indirectly ensured that its objectives were met. All that it had to do was to provide the loan and attach whatever conditions that were required. Now I just want to bring in one idea but not dwell too much on it. Loans can also have element of subsidies built into them. Interest rates, repayment period, grace periods, payment options, collaterals, waivers, all these bring in a different dimension to a loan. They can actually have elements of subsidies built into it. So these are examples of indirect forms of government, indirect tools of government. Where does partnership come into the picture? If you look at the slide which should be on the screen now, you can see that the PPP, the partnership between the public, meaning the government, and the private, straddles the direct and the indirect forms of government.